The Falkland Islands.
The Falkland Islands, Table of Contents.
All about the Falkland Islands, with visiting and touring information, geography, history, attractions, and other points of interest.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. Dr. Sydney22@gmail.com. 2022. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltov. For a more complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to this video using the link here.
Chapter 1. The Falkland Islands.
This is the Falkland Islands flag. The Falkland Islands are administered as a largely self-governing overseas territory of the United Kingdom.
The Falkland Islands are a self-governing colony of the United Kingdom in the South Atlantic Ocean.
The Falkland Islands are officially called the Colony of the Falkland Islands, and are also called the Malvinas Islands.
Argentina also claims the islands, calling them by their Spanish name, Islas Malvinas, and considers them part of the Tierra del Fuego province.
The islands appear on every Argentine map, also in Argentine weather forecasts, and even some tour guides to Argentina.
In South America, the islands are generally known as Islas Malvinas, because early French settlers had named the islands Malvinas in 1764, after their home port of Saint-Malo in France.
Here is the port of Saint-Malo in France.
Where are the Falkland Islands?
The Falkland Islands are an archipelago in the South Atlantic Ocean off the coast of South America. They are about 300 miles, or 480 kilometers, northeast of the southern tip of South America, and a similar distance east of the Strait of Magellan.
The Falkland Islands are in the southern reaches of temperate region, well below the Tropic of Capricorn.
The distance from Stanley, the capital and only town of the Falkland Islands, to Rio Gallegos in Argentina is 486 miles, or 783 kilometers.
The capital Stanley is also known as Port Stanley. There are also several small, scattered settlements on the islands. Stanley is 1,200 miles, or 1932 kilometers from Montevideo.
Stanley is 481 miles, or 774 kilometers from Ushuaia in Tierra del Fuego.
To the south of the Falkland Islands is the Southern Ocean, where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans join together, and beyond that is Antarctica.
Stanley, in the Falkland Islands, is at a latitude of 51.7 degrees south.
That is about the same distance south of the equator as London, England is north, at 51.5 degrees north, and Vancouver, British Columbia, at 49.3 degrees north.
How far away are the Falkland Islands?
From the Falkland Islands to New York City is 6,454 miles, or 10,386 kilometers. At a flying speed of 530 miles or 850 kilometers per hour. That takes about 12 hours.
From the Falkland Islands to London in the UK is 7,877 miles, or 12,677 kilometers. At a flying speed of 530 miles or 850 kilometers per hour. That takes about 15 hours. By ship at 20 knots. It takes 14 days.
The Falkland Islands consists of two major islands, West Falkland Island and East Falkland Island, together with about 200 smaller islands.
The capital and principal city of the Falkland Islands is Stanley, at the eastern tip of East Falkland Island.
How big are the Falkland Islands?
In between West Falkland Island and East Falkland Island is Falkland Sound. The distance across the sound is about 15 miles or 23 kilometers.
The total distance between the extreme ends of West Falkland Island and East Falkland Island is about 140 miles, or 222 kilometers.
The total area of the Falkland Islands is 4,700 square miles, or 12,200 square kilometers. That makes it slightly smaller than the U.S. state of Connecticut.
The total population is about 4,000, of whom half are British military personnel stationed on the islands.
Ranges of hills run east-west across the northern parts of the two main islands, reaching 2,312 feet, or 705 meters, at Mount Usborne in East Falkland.
The coastline has many drowned river valleys that form protected harbors.
An example of this is the port of Stanley on East Falkland Island.
What is on the Falkland Islands?
The islands are rocky and treeless. The principal vegetation is low and dense grasslands.
The chilly, damp climate inhibits the complete decomposition of plant matter and permits the accumulation of deep peat deposits, which are used locally for fuel.
There are no longer any land mammals indigenous to the Falklands. About 65 species of birds, including black-browed albatrosses, Falkland pipits,
Peregrine falcons, and striated caracaras, are found on the islands.
The Falklands are breeding grounds for several million penguins, mostly rockhopper, Magellanic, and gentoo penguins with smaller numbers of king and macaroni penguins.
These are rockhopper penguins.
The Magellanic penguins are similar to those at Punta Tombo south of Puerto Madryn in Argentina.
The closest penguin colony to Stanley is Gypsy Cove, a 10-minute drive away.
Gypsy Cove is home to several hundred breeding pairs of Magellanic penguins. They nest in burrows as deep as 6 feet into the peat soil.
They spend the winter feeding along the coast of South America and lay 2 eggs in November.
This is a Magellanic penguin.
The Magellanic penguins are the only penguins that nest in burrows in the ground.
This is a Magellanic penguin in chick.
This is a Magellanic penguin in its nest.
Thousands of penguins breed on the islands in September through April.
These are king penguins.
The white sand beaches of the Falkland Islands are fringed by dramatic cliffs, and are the site of the penguin breeding grounds in September. The young are born and reared in the islands throughout the southern summer.
Dolphins and porpoises are common.
And also numerous are southern sea lions.
And elephant seals.
The population of the Falkland Islands is English-speaking and primarily of British descent.
2/3 of the population lives in Stanley with a population of 2,115.
The rest of the population live in small, isolated sheep farming communities locally known as camp, from the Spanish campo meaning countryside. There is no unemployment in the Falklands, but a shortage of housing has discouraged immigration.
Falklands money.
The official currency is the Falkland pound, which is on par with the British pound. The Standard Chartered Bank, headquartered in London, is the only bank.
Currency exchange rates can change daily. For the latest exchange rate, click on this icon. 1 FKP, Falkland pound, equals 1.13 United States dollars.
1 United States dollar equals 0.88 FKP, Falkland pounds.
This is a commemorative coin. A 1998 Falkland Islands 5-pound 1 kilo silver coin.
Falklands economy.
Almost the whole area of the two main islands, outside of Stanley, is devoted to sheep farming. There is a total of about 700,000 sheep on the islands, producing several thousand metric tons of wool annually, as well as some mutton.
The island sheep stations, or ranches, vary in size and may be owned by individual families or by companies based in Britain.
The wool is sold in Great Britain and is the colony's leading export. The Falkland Islands Company, incorporated by Royal Charter in 1851, played a notable part in the economic development of the islands, and is still their single largest sheep rancher.
In the late 20th century, attempts were undertaken to diversify the island's economy. The government began selling fishing licenses to foreigners in 1987, and the revenue generated from such sales was a major contributor to the economy.
In the early 1990s, seismic studies suggested the presence of offshore oil reserves, and licenses were granted to foreign companies for exploration.
Tourism, especially ecotourism, has grown rapidly in recent years. Such efforts have enabled the island's economy to enjoy sustained growth since the late 1980s.
The history of the Falkland Islands.
The English navigator John Davis in the ship Desire may have been the first person to sight the Falklands in 1592.
But it was the Dutchman Sebald de Weert who made the first undisputed sighting of them about 1600.
The English captain John Strong made the first recorded landing in the Falklands in 1690. No native people lived on the islands.
Captain John Strong named the sound between the two main islands after Viscount Falkland, a British naval official.
The name was later applied to the whole island group.
The French navigator Louis-Antoine de Bougainville founded the island's first settlement, on East Falkland Island, in 1764.
And he named the islands the Malvinas.
In 1765, the British are the first to settle West Falkland. In 1767, the Spanish buy out the French settlement in East Falkland, and in 1770, the British are driven off of West Falkland by the Spanish.
In 1771, the British outpost on West Falkland was restored. In 1774, the British withdrew from the island for reasons of economy, without renouncing their claim to the Falklands. Spain maintained a settlement on East Falkland, which it called Soledad Island, until 1811.
In 1820, the Buenos Aires government, which had declared its independence from Spain in 1816, proclaimed its sovereignty over the Falklands in 1831. The U.S. warship Lexington destroyed the Argentine settlement on East Falkland in reprisal for the arrest of 3 U.S. ships that had been hunting seals in the area.
In 1833, a British force expelled the few remaining Argentine officials from the island without firing a shot. In 1841, a British civilian lieutenant governor is appointed for the Falklands. In 1885, the British community of some 1,800 people on the islands has become self-supporting. Argentina regularly protests Britain's occupation of the islands.
In 1964, the Falkland Islands status is debated by the UN Committee on Decolonization.
Argentina based its claim to the Falklands on Papal Bulls of 1493 modified by the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494, by which Spain and Portugal had divided the New World between themselves. Succession from Spain, the proximity to South America, and the need to end a colonial situation.
Britain based its claim on British open, continuous, effective possession, occupation, and administration of the islands since 1833. Determination to apply to the Falklanders the principle of self-determination as recognized in the United Nations Charter. And far from ending a colonial situation, Argentine rule and control of the lives of the Falklanders against their wishes would in fact create one.
In 1965, the UN General Assembly approved a resolution inviting Britain and Argentina to hold discussions to find a peaceful solution to the dispute. These discussions continued for 17 years to February 1982.
On April 2, 1982, Argentina's military government invaded the Falklands. This act started the Falkland Islands War, which ended 10 weeks later with the surrender of the Argentine forces at Stanley to British troops who had forcibly reoccupied the islands.
In 1990, Britain and Argentina re-established full diplomatic relations, but the issue of sovereignty remains a point of contention. Britain continues to maintain some 2,000 troops on the islands.
The only town on the Falkland Islands is Stanley.
This is Stanley and the Jetty Visitor Center.
This is the Stanley and the Jetty Visitor Center.
This shows the location of the public jetty and the visitor center.
This is the Visitors Center in Stanley.
Stanley has a population of 2,115 and is the cultural and economic center of the islands.
Stanley, also known as Port Stanley, is home to the Falkland Islands Museum and National Trust, a museum devoted to the history of the islands.
This shows the location of the Falkland Islands Museum and National Trust.
The Falkland Islands have been issuing stamps that reflect the area's history and wildlife since the late 1800s.
Port Stanley is the Falkland Islands Philatelic Bureau.
Stanley offers a mix of stone cottages, colorfully painted roofs and modern buildings.
The island's British heritage is apparent with pubs, bright reed mailboxes, and numerous well-kept gardens.
Sporting activities are popular on the islands and include bird watching, fishing, and horseback riding.
An arch formed by whale ribs stands outside Christ Church Cathedral in Port Stanley.
This shows the location of the whalebone arch.
The arch was erected in 1933 to celebrate a century of British rule.
This is the Christ Church Cathedral.
West Store is a general store that is good for buying souvenirs and other items.
This shows the location of the West Store.
Falkland Island scenes.
These are some scenes of the Falkland Islands.
These are some scenes of the Falkland Islands.
This is the shore of Carcass Island.
These are buildings on Carcass Island.
The Falkland Islands War is also called the Falklands War, the Malvinas War, or the South Atlantic War. It was a brief, undeclared war fought between Argentina and Great Britain in 1982 over the control of the Falkland Islands and associated island dependencies.
Argentina had claimed sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, which lie 300 miles, or 480 kilometers, east of its coast, since the early 19th century. But Britain had occupied and administered the island since 1833 and had consistently rejected Argentina's claims.
The decision to invade was chiefly political. The junta, which was being criticized for economic mismanagement and human rights abuses, believed that the recovery of the islands would unite Argentines behind the government in a patriotic fervor.
In early 1982, the Argentine military junta led by Lieutenant General Leopoldo Galtieri gave up on long-running negotiations with Britain, and instead launched an invasion of the islands.
Argentine troops invaded the Falklands on April 2, 1982, rapidly overcoming the small garrison of British Marines at the capital of Stanley, Port Stanley. They obeyed orders not to inflict any British casualties, despite losses to their own units.
The next day Argentina seized the associated islands of South Georgia in the South Sandwich Group. By late April, Argentina had stationed more than 10,000 troops on the Falklands, although the vast majority of these were poorly trained conscripts.
As expected, the Argentine populace reacted favorably, with large crowds gathering at the Plaza de Mayo, in front of the presidential palace, to demonstrate support for the military initiative.
Most European powers voiced support for Great Britain, and European military advisors were withdrawn from Argentine bases. However, most Latin American governments sympathized with Argentina.
A notable exception was Chile, which maintained a state of alert against its neighbor, owing to a dispute over islands in the Beagle Channel. The perceived threat from Chile prompted Argentina to keep most of its elite troops on the mainland.
In addition, Argentine military planners had trusted that the United States would remain neutral in the conflict. But, following unsuccessful mediation attempts, the United States offered full support to Great Britain,
allowing its NATO ally to use its air-to-air missiles, communications equipment, aviation fuel, and other military stockpiles on British-held Ascension Island, as well as cooperating with military intelligence.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher decided to retake the Falkland Islands.
On April 25, while the British task force with 30,000 aboard was steaming 8,000 miles, 13,000 kilometers, to the war zone via Ascension Island, a smaller British force retook South Georgia Island, in the process capturing one of Argentina's vintage diesel-electric submarines.
On May 2, the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano was sunk outside the war zone by the British nuclear submarine Conqueror, with the loss of life of 300 Argentine sailors. Following this controversial event, most other Argentine ships were kept distant from the conflict. But Argentine submarine action continued to threaten the British fleet. On May 2, the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano was sunk outside the war zone by the British nuclear submarine Conqueror, with the loss of life of 300 Argentine sailors. Following this controversial event, most other Argentine ships were kept distant from the conflict. But Argentine submarine action continued to threaten the British fleet.
The cruiser General Belgrano was formerly the USS Phoenix, which was at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked on December 7, 1941. She escaped to sea and had a distinguished career in the Pacific War.
This is the British nuclear submarine Conqueror which sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano.
The British naval force and the land-based Argentine Air Force fought intensive battles, during which the Argentines sank the HMS Sheffield and the container ship Atlantic Conveyor with Exocet air-to-sea missiles.
In addition, 2 frigates and another destroyer were sunk and several other vessels damaged. But the majority of Argentine bombs did not detonate.
The frigate HMS Antelope explodes.
The British made an amphibious landing near Port San Carlos, on the northern coast of East Falkland, on May 21.
From this beachhead the British infantry advanced southward to capture the settlements of Darwin and Goose Green, after which they turned eastward to surround Stanley on May 31.
The large Argentine garrison at Stanley surrendered on June 14, effectively ending the conflict. British forces reoccupied the South Sandwich Islands on June 20.
The British captured some 11,400 Argentine prisoners during the war, all of whom were afterward released. Nearly 750 Argentine troops were killed, including 368 in the sinking of the General Belgrano, while Britain lost 256.
Scores of Argentine aircraft of various types were destroyed, most while on the ground, and the British lost 10 Harrier jets and more than 24 helicopters.
Argentina's ignominious defeat severely discredited the military government and led to the restoration of civilian rule there in 1983. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher converted widespread patriotic support into a landslide victory for her Conservative Party in that year's parliamentary election. Argentina's ignominious defeat severely discredited the military government and led to the restoration of civilian rule there in 1983. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher converted widespread patriotic support into a landslide victory for her Conservative Party in that year's parliamentary election.
The aftermath of the war.
Almost every city in Argentina has a memorial to the fallen of the 1982 war, and a street named Malvinas Argentinas.
At many of the entrance points to the country and to some of the provinces there are roadside signs proclaiming Las Malvinas son Argentinas, the Malvinas are Argentine.
The 2nd of April is a national holiday in Argentina called Dia de los Caídos en Malvinas, or the Day of the Fallen. June 14th is Liberation Day on the Falkland Islands, South Georgia, and the South Sandwich Islands.
This is the Plaza Islas Malvinas in Ushuaia.
This is the Malvinas Memorial in Plaza Islas Malvinas.
This is the Malvinas Memorial in Plaza Islas Malvinas.
This is a sign in Ushuaia.
This is a sign in Ushuaia.
The British government committed their defense policy to what they named Fortress Falklands, with the expansion of airfields to handle Phantom fighters and wide-bodied long-range jet transports capable of reinforcing the Falklands at very short notice.
For the residents of these remote islands the excitement was over. Their days in the spotlight of the world media was at an end. And it was back to the mundane routine of trying to carve out a living here, still under the guardianship of Great Britain.
In 1990, Britain and Argentina re-established full diplomatic relations, but the issue of sovereignty of the Falkland Islands remains a point of contention.
This is me in the Ushuaia, Argentina jail.
Today,
February 3, 2012. Falkland tensions grow ahead of invasion anniversary. By Vladimir Hernandez, BBC News. Buenos Aires tensions over the Falkland Islands have been increasing ahead of the 30th anniversary of Argentina's invasion in 1982. There is a growing support among Argentines for the government's more aggressive approach on the issue. The latest escalation was prompted by the decision of Mercosur, a South American trading bloc, to close its ports to ships flying the Falkland Islands flag in December. When British Prime Minister David Cameron then accused Argentina of colonialism, the Argentine Senate passed a motion condemning his comments. There were also demonstrations, with the Union flag burning, outside the British Embassy in Buenos Aires.
Then the Royal Navy announced that it was sending the destroyer HMS Dauntless to the South Atlantic, off the Falklands. The British government said the move was routine, but it will do little to ease tensions in the region.
Prince William is sent to the Falklands as a search and rescue helicopter pilot.
The climate of the Falkland Islands.
Will it be hot in the Falkland Islands? Or will it be cold? Here are the average high and low temperatures in degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year in Stanley.
Here are the average high and low temperatures in degrees Celsius throughout the year in Stanley.
We see that Stanley has summer, December, January, February, average high temperatures in the high 50s, 15 degrees Celsius, range. At night summer temperatures drop to the somewhat chilly 45 degrees Fahrenheit range, 7 degrees Celsius. The highest recorded summer temperature is only 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 degrees Celsius.
The winter months, June, July, August, are chilly with average high temperatures in the 40-degree Fahrenheit range, 4 degrees Celsius. At night the winter temperatures drop down to close to freezing in the range of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. The lowest recorded winter temperature is 17 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 8 degrees Celsius.
Rainfall in Stanley.
Here is the average rainfall in inches throughout the year in Stanley. The total yearly rainfall is 25 inches. 681 millimeters.
Here is the average rainfall in millimeters throughout the year in Stanley. Here is the average number of days per month. With significant precipitation, greater than 1/10 of a millimeter. Throughout the year in Stanley. We see that it rains about 10 days every month. Throughout the year.
The Falkland Islands are very windy from the prevailing easterlies that circulate unimpeded around the Southern Ocean.
Recommended videos.
Recommended video, The Origins of the Falkland Islands. 3 minutes. 45 seconds.
Recommended video, 7 facts about the Falkland Islands. 8 minutes. 23 seconds.
Recommended video, The Falkland Islands, 11 minutes.
Recommended video, How British Are the Falkland Islands. 3 minutes. 26 seconds.
Recommended video, The Falklands War, 1982.
Recommended video, The Falklands, Mini Wars Number 1.
The Falkland Islands, Table of Contents.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.